Hey everybody, how's it going? Welcome to Urban Shaman. I'm Justin Baer, I'm the new artistic director here. We're so grateful to be hosting Melissa Johns for her solo exhibition Hand-Me-Downs. And I appreciate all of you taking the time to come for the artist talk today, in person and for those who are online virtually. Since 1996, Urban Shaman Contemporary Aboriginal Art has been committed to serving the needs of emerging, mid-career, and established Indigenous artists through exhibitions and associated programming, workshops, training, and residencies. We focus on increasing exposure of Indigenous artists on a local, national, and international level, and provide support so artists can thrive in the broader arts community. Urban Shaman is situated on stolen land in the Exchange District of Winnipeg, Manitoba, the sites of Treaty 1 and the Manitoba Act, in which the Innu, Anishinaabe, Dene, Dakota, Oji-Cree, and Métis Nations maintain legal ownership over. As treaty signatories, it's our responsibility to return to the original treaty intentions of sharing this land and respecting the animal and plant nations, who we are also in treaty with. For everyone who's watching virtually, I encourage you to think about the land you're on and the treaties that exist there as well. Melissa Johns is a new media artist, an educator from mixed Ganakawage, Mohawk, Turtle Clan, and French-Canadian background, born and raised in Toronto. Melissa's visual practice uses interdisciplinary methods to collect, preserve, and transform fragments of the stories around her, specializing in virtual reality installations, digital painting, and video art. Melissa is an educator, arts administrator, and artist, and loves working with Indigenous artists and Indigenous youth. She's worked with Imaginative, National Film Board, and completed her MFA at OCAD University. Her graduate research is centered on embedding cultural narratives and family histories in virtual environments. She also has an advanced diploma in 3D animation from Humber College. We'd like to thank all of our partners and friends who've supported this exhibition. We'd like to thank NIMAC, the National Indigenous Media Arts Coalition. Thank you so much. Indigenous Media Arts Coalition. We'd like to thank Art City for hosting Melissa's workshop this week. So fun. And then we would like to thank, funders and supports, so NIMAC, Canada Council for the Arts, Manitoba Arts Council, Winnipeg Arts Council, and the individuals who helped install and help with all the different facets of getting this exhibition up. So we'd like to thank Melissa's brother, Matthew Johns. We'd like to thank Zoe Lebrun, who helped with install, the 20431 Collective, who volunteered their time to do some painting, Scott Fitzpatrick, who's here with the Broadcast Collective, doing this awesome live stream for us. And then we'd like to thank Jory Thomas as well for working on the essay for this exhibition. We'll do a question and answer for about 15 to 20 minutes after the presentation. For those online, you're welcome to leave your comments in the chat, and they'll be read out after the in-person questions. So thank you so much for coming, and I'll pass it over to you, Melissa.
Thank you, Justin. Sego Seguego Melyungats Waganikahaga Waginaden. Hi everyone, I'm Melissa Johns, and thank you so much for joining me for this artist talk and for my solo show, Hand-Me-Downs at Urban Shaman. Nyawe as well for everyone joining virtually and physically. And thank you so much everyone at Urban and at NIMAC for making this possible. Like, it has been a dream come true, actually. And for everyone here and remotely, I wanted to let you know that the show runs until July 20th, 2024, and that a 360 tour of the exhibition will be available on Urban Shaman's website next month. So even if you're not able to see the space in person, I encourage you to check it out because, I mean, it's virtual reality. Come on, see it. It's great. So in order to situate myself both as an artist and someone who is on Turtle Island, I want to tell you a little bit about my family. They're the reason I'm here and the reason that I make art. I come from two distinct families of storytellers. My mother's family immigrated from France in the 1600s, moving from the East Coast through to Quebec, and eventually settling in Northern Ontario. So their ancestral migration was an escape from colonial deportation, which was part of the larger dérangement or Acadian expulsion. My mom was the 16th of 17 children, with Grandpa Dona Babin working for the railway and Grandma Veronica Babin essentially wrangling kids and working half of the odd jobs in town. My father's family has always been here, more or less always been here, and has been moving freely between Ohsweken, Buffalo, and Fort Erie over the last 100 years or so. Great-grandpa Gowandasan, on the top right here, was born in Ohsweken and survived the Mohawk Residential Institute, aka the Mush Hole. His son, my grandpa Dave Johns, on the left next to my dad, left the res at 16 to find work and shared very little traditional knowledge with his children. My dad, who's the second of 8 kids, grew up with a very limited connection to ceremony and culture and very, very narrowly escaped the 60s scoop. He was taken across the border to Buffalo to evade Canada's child welfare services. My mom and dad met in Toronto, where I was born and where I live now. So to suffice to say, I grew up without like a really strong understanding of my culture, but what I did grow up with was technology and these like huge family gatherings. So this is me and my younger brother Matt using our home computer as kids, and I'd also inherited a creative streak and was just obsessed with drawing. Like, you could not get me to stop making art, even if I didn't really like know what I was doing. You just couldn't stop my hands moving and my brain thinking and my eyes darting around like crazy. So as a teen, I fell in love with digital art. I taught myself the Adobe suite, like, graphic design, making animations on Macromedia Flash, and drawing with this like really crappy tablet I found on eBay. And over the years, I eventually got to the point where I was sort of dissatisfied with the end result of a painting. Like, I could spend hours and hours rendering an image, a painting, but at the end of the day, it was a static image. So at the end of the day, if I spent, 20, 30 hours on a painting, the end result was just this like completely static image. And I wanted to get more. I wanted to be able to like reach in and grab at it. So I started to play with paintings that moved in some kind of way, and I ended up becoming enamored with animation and more like stereoscopic effects. I was also a perennial student. I think I spent like a grand total of 11 years in post-secondary school, where I could have been a doctor by now, but instead I'm an artist, so that's awesome. When I was in my undergrad, I tried out just about every kind of media I could get my hands on before I settled into a digital specialization. I love new media because even though it's niche, it has so many sub-modes of process and expression, and it gives me like a lot of room to experiment and shake things up. Like when I meet someone else who's like, yeah, I work in new media, I'm like, what do you do? They're like, oh, I make experimental soundscapes. And I'm like, that's entirely different from what I do. So I can exist under that umbrella of like new media and interdisciplinary media, and there's a lot of room to play and experiment and have fun with it. I'm not as boxed in, I guess, if someone was like, what do you do? And I'm like, sculpture. No hate on sculptures. Like, I love people who make sculpture. So nostalgia and memory were themes that had already started to emerge in my practice by the time I finished my bachelor's. My maternal grandmother lived to age 99, and for a lot of the time that I knew her, she suffered from dementia. And I had this like really horrible fear of losing my memories to the point where sometimes I had a hard time being present in the moment with people close to me, because I was trying to like crystallize those moments so I wouldn't ever forget them and just hold on to them and like collect them and hoard them, essentially. And I was also struggling with my identity. I always knew that I was Native. Like that was something that, my parents were like, you're Native and you should be proud of that. And I'm like, but what is that? Like, what beyond, Disney's Pocahontas? Like, what is being Native really? I had a status card to prove it, but it was just this sort of like, strange little plastic piece of paper. And yeah, I just didn't really understand what it meant beyond that. And also the card wasn't correct either. Like my card says I'm Upper Cayuga, and then when we started to dig and do like proper genealogical research, it turns out that my great grandmother like band hopped us. So we were actually Mohawk, and she band hopped us to be Cayuga because they got like an extra $1 monthly allowance. So she just like took all her kids and registered them as Cayuga. And it's like, okay, so I spent what, like 18 years of my life thinking I'm Cayuga on this card, and now I'm Mohawk. Like, what does this mean? What is all this? And on top of it, like, in case you didn't notice, I am very white passing, and so it's complicated. And I had this yearning to belong to my culture, but I was worried that when I would go into native spaces, that people would just look at me and be like, oh, what's this white girl doing here? So I really wanted to belong to my culture, but I felt like and feared being an outsider. Like, I'd walk home, I'd go to a powwow, and then I'd walk home in tears. And I found that I could use art as a means to like safely research and explore that part of my identity until I felt strong enough to like reach outside and into community. Yeah, it's a lot of like personal info, but we're doing it. So when I finished my bachelor's, I took on a diploma in 3D animation, and I discovered this real love for modeling objects with like a close to a photorealistic look. I'd been practicing with everyday objects, the kind of stuff that I could hold and like look at while I was working on the computer. And I discovered this thing that I'm calling the tea set effect, where I was making this little tea set that was like made for kids in 3D. And a coworker looked over my shoulder and he was just like, oh my God, like my sister had the exact same tea set, except like hers was pink. And then he just started telling me like his entire childhood, basically, just because he saw my screen and saw an object on it, and it elicited this like really strong emotional and like memory-based impact on him. And so I was like, okay, I'm on to something with this. It's the 3D representation is prompting something. So I already knew that objects had a lot of power when it came to memories because of Grandma Babin. So like when she was in the thick of her dementia, and she like couldn't recognize her kids, she thought that she was 16 and was about to get married, like any day now. Any day I'm gonna get married to Donna, it's gonna be great. Who are you again? You could hand her harmonica, and she would just take it and she would just go crazy on it. And then as soon as she stopped playing the music, there would be frequently these moments of lucidity where she'd be like, oh, Mary, and oh, Melissa, and you know, she'd have a conversation with us and tell us a story, and then eventually like the fog came back and she went away. But I loved how this object was a physical anchor for her memories. And then on top of it, the harmonica itself had all of these like dents and scratches and markers, like physical evidence of her, like it was her material biography that had been imprinted on that harmonica. And then a further layer of it is now anytime I see a harmonica, like Grandma Babin's long gone, but anytime I see a harmonica or I hear someone playing it, that evokes her for me. So like it brings her back. And so there's layers to objects as vessels of meaning. So after our family Boxing Day gathering in 2016, I took all these pictures of my Grandpa John's house. I took like the black tiles on the kitchen floor and the old out-of-tune piano and his like glass chandelier, or crystal, I guess. I don't really know how chandeliers work. And he had this snowshoe sign and these pass-through kitchen walls. So when someone came in through the back door, always through the back door, you could see them from the kitchen. And Grandpa didn't really understand what I was doing, but he was cool with it, and he followed me around the entire time. He was, he was so happy to like have company in that house at any time, even though he had just come back from this big, exhausting party. And he's like padding around with me at this odd hour, watching me just like take pictures of everything that he owned. And I went home with the pictures, thinking about which objects I was going to like recreate as practice. And I was really excited to tell him and show him what I was doing so that he could sort of understand my art and understand what could be done with it. And so I brought the pictures home, I was excited, and then 3 weeks later he died. And all his stuff got, distributed and disseminated, and his house got boxed up, and then it was sold in short order. And it was that space that had been kind of so important to my childhood, several times a year, always visiting, always seeing family. It was no longer accessible to me, but I had all of these pictures. And I knew I had to do something with them. And so there's these layers of grief involved with his passing. It's not just losing a patriarch, but also a physical site for family gatherings, future family gatherings. And my cousin Dylan actually said it best in an interview we had in 2021. We spent so many years here, all the memories and stuff, right? And this might be the last time I'm in here. And then the fact that somebody else is coming in here, there's gonna be a new family in here, and I think that was the hardest part. Not so much saying goodbye, but having to turn it over to somebody who's never gonna know. They're gonna move in, have their family, and hopefully live a very happy life, but they're never gonna know the times we had here. So while I felt like I was on to something with the 3D recreation, I wasn't ready to work with the photos from Grandpa's house yet. So I sat on them for a long time. And in the meantime, for my animation capstone in 2019, I used my own belongings and my own apartment and populated them in a VR space that was based on sort of a day and nighttime version of my bedroom. I had been working on a VR team while I was also in college, and acquired these like level design skills. And it was really satisfying to be able to make these like dream-like spaces that belonged to me, like really belonged to me, and I could go in it and spend as much time in there as I wanted to. So shortly after this, I used VR as a way to help me reconcile some of my feelings about not being native enough. Early on in my grad studies, I took the time to like acknowledge my own diasporic trauma, essentially. And one of the most important pieces of knowledge was gifted to me by Peter Morin at OCAD, who told me that my experiences to date are native experiences. That, you know, the residential school system was wildly successful, and the way that I felt was directly stemming from that. So he also told me that the healing journey is a lifelong one, and that I would be strong enough to take it on not only for myself, but for my family as well. And at the time I was like, yeah, okay, like, you know, maybe for me, but I don't know about the rest of my family, like, we'll see. And he was right, he was completely right. So the result of the self-reflection at the time was this piece that I called The Docks, and it was a mobile VR experience where you sat at a long dock and you looked out into dark water in front of you, and behind you there was like a blazing fire that you could sort of see through the trees but not very clearly, and distorted drums and like a glitchy soundscape, and you could spend. But a recurring theme with my VR is you can kind of spend as long as you want inside of it. There's not really a beginning or an end to any of these pieces. But it was made to address the longing which characterized my sort of previous identity-based interventions, and to act as a site of resting place for these old wounds. So creating a dedicated space for those familiar and ambivalent feelings to live, like I can put them here, they can stay here. It allowed me to more deeply explore my indigeneity on the basis of what I am rather than what I lack. So my questions started to shift more towards regeneration and community building and filling in the gaps. And I found a lot of my questions echoed in Pauline Waterfall's process of uncovering her Hiltsuk heritage, with whom I share many of the same methods of seeking. It's about asking ridiculous questions and undertaking genealogical projects, conducting memory-based interviews, and piecing together traditional knowledge in a way that works for you. So COVID brought a strange interruption to my grad studies, but it also gave me a year off that really changed my life. I took on a job at Imaginative, and I was able to really immerse myself in a community of pan-Indigenous artists and creatives. It sort of unlocked the arts administrator within me, where anytime I'm not working on my own art, I want to be helping somebody else make theirs a reality. And I wound up keeping my job with Imaginative even after I went back to school. I was juggling both full-time responsibilities, and I understand that that was a little unhinged, but it wasn't the first time I've done something like that. I also had the opportunity to take my first artist residency on Victoria Island, and while I was there, I was playing with these old photos. So some of them are from my family, and some of them are ones that I've collected from flea markets and antique shops in different provinces. I wanted to take these moments that didn't strictly belong to me, right? You know, that moment belongs to my aunt. That moment belongs to someone I don't know and who might not even be here anymore. And I wanted to expand on it. So interpreting them into a digital painting, and then imagining imagining what might be happening a few seconds before or a few seconds after that camera flash, and then animating that imagination, so sort of extrapolating on a frozen moment. And then when I returned to school, I decided to position my graduate work as a gift to my family. So my hands-on research consisted of pouring through family photo albums and tapes. I traveled to Fort Erie and north to Chapleau to visit relatives in their homes and interview them. My mom helped me call everyone because family phone tree is scary sometimes. And she explained the idea, Mel's art thing, just go with it. And I found out that the word interview really spooked a lot of my family members. Like they were calling my mom, like, what do I do? Like, what do I wear? Like, do I have to prepare? And it's like, no, like I just want to talk to you with like tea and a microphone on the table. Like, just ignore the microphone. And so I found that like while the sessions were recorded with a microphone, it was a lot more similar to having tea over the kitchen table than like a traditional social sciences interview. And my cousin Kendall helped me come up with a better name for them, so we called them story sessions, which is way less intimidating than it's time for the interview. So I'd give them a prompt, or maybe I would either ask, can you tell me a little bit about the childhood home you grew up in? Or if I already knew about like a classic family story, I'd be like, yeah, can you tell me the story about the record player? And just go from there. They'd tell me stories, and a lot of the time without me prompting, they would describe the environments that those memories took place in and objects that had special meaning for them. So then I'd go around in their houses and like take pictures of their pictures. I'd take pictures of their stuff. I'd ask about their stuff, and I would make note of any stories that involved other family members so I could ask them and sort of get their take on it. I accidentally became a family historian along the way, and I got closer with so many of my relatives. It was a really special experience. And I brought all their stories home with me and planned to house them in a new VR environment. So like my mom has these really old Tupperware containers on the left there. These like really, those ugly, beautiful, ugly 70s ones that like they either last forever or they get recalled because they're giving everybody cancer. So like I wanted to make a 3D model of them and went looking online. I'm at home, I'm in Toronto, I'm in my comfy apartment. Mom is an hour away. She lives in Burlington, it's fine. And so I wasn't gonna visit anytime soon, and I wanted to model this thing in the meantime though. So I went online, I'm looking for reference photos, I'm typing like 70s Tupperware yellow, and scrolling until I found the ones that looked like that. And as soon as I found somebody else's picture of somebody else's Tupperware that's the same kind that my mom had, I got emotional. I was like crying like in front of my computer, and I was like, what the hell's going on? Like, my mom's alive. I can call her, right? I could go visit her like right now if I want to. Like, why am I crying looking at a picture of the same Tupperware that she has? But like, it's more than the Tupperware, right? It's all the times that we baked something together. It's growing up, and it's the ritualized action of like taking out these big tubs of like flour and sugar. It's the recipes that have been passed throughout the generations of women in my family. It's that vibrant yellow that is stamped in the back of my mind. And during later research, I found these studies about how representative images of an object can elicit almost all of the same feelings and affect and memories, like almost as much as having the real object in front of you. Seeing an image is nearly as powerful. And so I thought, okay, how can I communicate the essence of an object, like of an original, through a careful technical reproduction? Like, how can I use 3D to create that same impact of seeing an image or seeing the real thing in front of you? So I refer to my 3D process not necessarily as copying or replicating, but one of translation. So in order to recreate something in 3D, I have to understand how it works, and I have to study the object really carefully. It's like the visual equivalent of taking something apart so that you can put it back together, which is incidentally a trait that runs in my family. My dad took apart, was it a record player? Yeah, he's here in the front row. He's looking at me with a smirk. And so for the Johns family sign, which is like a snowshoe that has the foot part taken out, and it's been replaced with a chalkboard. And my grandma wrote this like really cheery message with like a couple little smudges where she messed up, and it just says like the Johns welcome you. And so that was always what you would see first thing walking into Grandpa's house on the wall. And so when I tackled that, I traced my grandmother's handwriting digitally, and I mapped out the way that the sinew binding worked on the snowshoe, like literally numbered, like, okay, this one goes to here, and then it goes to here. So in order to make that snowshoe in 3D, I'm kind of figuring out how to make a snowshoe for real. I could take those same skills, and if I have the right materials, I could do it in reality. And when the textures are correct, I can like look at that sinew and like feel that waxy feeling under my fingers when what my fingers are actually touching is the keyboard. So in this process, I get to feel like I'm engaging with the person who made the shoe originally. I'm learning from their craft. And then I'm also with my grandmother as she's like carefully writing the cheery message for everybody. So this is the result of that 1.5 year process, which is a living room with furniture that shifts through the decades. And as you get closer to different objects, you hear bits and pieces of my family's stories. It's called Here I Stand, Still Guarded. And after I graduated, I brought the work around on a mini VR tour to Chapleau and Fort Erie and all of the places in between that my relatives live, so that they could all experience it themselves. So it's no longer Mel's art thing. It's, oh, I get it now, I understand. And so we packed it into a car, and we were setting it up in garages and living rooms and just, cables everywhere and tripods. My mom came with me to the drive up to Chapleau, and so did my brother. And then my dad came with me to the drive to Fort Erie. So it was like also just a point of family gathering. And then a lot of the time, certain relatives actually hadn't seen each other in a while. And so the installation became this sort of gathering space for relatives to come together and see the thing and then catch up with each other and sort of share. And then, of course, seeing the thing made more stories come to light, right? It's like, oh, did you hear Alan talking about that? Like when did he take down a wolf? And then it goes from there. And yeah, seeing my family blown away by this technology was incredibly special. Being able to see their lives represented in it. I had aunties who were literally like in their 80s running around in this thing like they're kids, and it's like, Aunt Edna, slow down, like you're gonna hit the mirror, like. And so someone who isn't part of my family left me a really beautiful reflection on it. I felt an overwhelming sense of place and home. Despite me not growing up in this space, I felt like I knew it, like it was lived in. The juxtaposition of the difficult conversations made me feel like I was a kid, finally understanding what the adults were talking about. So everything in Here I Stand Still Guarded is on variable timers, and the audio is also semi-randomized. So like walking near a couch triggers 1 of 12 different audio pieces. So as you move around the space, you sort of get more and different things from it. There's technically no beginning or end, and you can spend as long as you want. My cousin Kendall is the current record holder. She spent 40 minutes inside of it. And when she came back, she was like, whoa, everything's so yellow, like, because you have screens stuck in your eyes. And these are renders taken from the same angles, about a minute apart. So just the way that the space fluctuates and changes. And as it goes, I can't even predict what it'll look like. If it was running for 8 hours, the configurations would be completely different. So from there, I've been expanding on my 3D practice outside of VR, as well as bringing my work back into the physical realm. I have this now an absolute hoard, a real wealth of family photos. More recently, tapes that I've been digitizing and then manipulating. I got to do some tape digitization at Video Pool last year, which was a real treat. On top of that, I've been taking photos of my family as we are now, because I think it's important not to neglect that present documentation. So like on the right-hand side here, is like a classic one from my mom's side, which is my grandpa Dona Babin. He's on ice skates, holding a baby and a cigarette in his mouth. and while also teaching another one of his kids how to play hockey with the most busted stick I've ever seen. And then below is just like a little one of mine that I took of my cousin Dylan chopping wood, also with a dangling cigarette, and that's on my dad's side of the family. So I think it's really important not to neglect the present for the past, but to hold both as they inform one another. I think that the past makes us who we are, and the present recontextualizes what came before us. So I've started to characterize my practice as one that holds conversations with the past. I have these pieces of vintage beadwork that I've been accumulating over the last couple of years thanks to a Canada Council grant, and I've been making my own twists on them. So if one of them says, think of me, the one that I make might say, think of us. Or, mother 1936, and mine says other 2024, because I'm not a mom. Historically, these types of whimsies would have been made and sold to tourists who were visiting like Niagara Falls or similar by Haudenosaunee women, and it was a subsistence practice done by some absolutely phenomenal beaders. The oldest one in the gallery today is from 1936, but I have more that I'm currently working with that are dated as far back as 1890, and I'm taking my time with them because they're just splendid. So what you're seeing on the screen right now is the very first one that I did. We have the original on the left, then a 3D translation in the middle, and then on the right is my physical response. So I set out with these to make them as close to the original as possible in terms of like materials and technique. But when it came to beadwork, I am largely self-taught, so there's lots of mistakes. Setting out to make these has been like sitting down with these distant aunties that made them and getting a lesson every time. When I replicate in 3D, I'm able to get a really close, realistic result. But when it's more physical beadwork, a lot of myself tends to come through the work instead against my will. My beadwork is a bit messier. Not all the same bead types are available, so I have to make my own aesthetic decisions in lieu of it. And so, mine are like really sparkly and kind of like bougie native. And the result is unmistakably mine, for better or for worse. And so something that I really appreciate about this body of work is that I can actually chart my own progress through it, and I can see the passage of my own time sitting alongside all of these previous beaders. I've also connected as an adult with my cousin Andrea Johns, shout out Beads by Dre, who is a fabulous beader, as well as my Seneca art auntie, Karen Veeraswamy, and they've been giving me all these tips that I wish I had years ago. Another physical translation I've been working with has been my little beaded blankets. I made them much the same way that my relatives would have, which is one stitch at a time while watching TV. Instead, it's just one bead at a time. And I was wrapped up in these blankets above me my entire life. And I've always thought about sort of the love and the time that they put into them, and how some of these blankets have outlived the women that have made them. So much of craft is historically feminine labor, and so I think there's something to be said for the accumulated knowledge that's embedded in each chain of a doily or an afghan. It's techniques that were taught to me by my mother, from her mother's mother, and so this knowledge it's gendered and domestic, but it's sort of alluring all the same. So I'd spend hours poring over mom's blankets and marveling over like complicated stitches and soft textiles for these tough resolves, and it's like tenderness and resilience intertwined. So each of these blankets has a story. That's me. That's my baby blanket that my mom made for me. The reason that these exist is because I had decided to recreate my favorite blanket that Grandma John's made. I had to go around to like a dozen stores to find enough close colors, because when I actually started to get into the project, I realized how deep I was in this. I was like, oh my God, it's not just brown and blue and white. There's like 25 colors in this thing. What am I gonna do? And her approach is very like odds and ends, like use what you have, right? And then border it in these set colors so that you can get away with it. And the result is colorful and strange and gorgeous. And so once I had finished the crochet version, I actually decided to take it a step further and bring it into beadwork, because I'm looking at these colors and I'm like, I have beads that kind of look like this. I wonder if I could, and the answer is yes, you can. Yes, you can make granny squares with beads. And so once I had finished that one of my sort of my favorite blanket, it just was unstoppable from there. And it was like, all right, every single blanket I have is going to get a beaded version, because like a lot of them live in my mom's house. Some of them are living with my other relatives, and you know, good. It's important that they have them and keep them, but I want one too. So this is how I get them. I get these little miniatures, and because each one of them also has like a one bead per stitch, essentially. The beaded blankets relative to one another are all sort of an appropriate scale, which was not a happy accident, but just something positive that I didn't realize when I started it. So all these blankets have a story. I'll tell you the story about the brown one, this like beautiful like 70s brown blanket with a scallop top and fringes only on one side. My mom made it, and she told me, I picked the colors to match my brand new Pontiac Sunbird, like the car. It was going to be for me, but I totaled my car on the way home. The sun was in my eyes, and the car turned over, and everything was in slow motion. All I could hear was the glass breaking. But I didn't have the money for the deductible. So I was going around selling pop bottles, whatever I could do in Chapleau to make the money, and then Christmas came. I had no money. All I had was this Afghan that I'd been working on forever. So I decided I'd give it to my mother at Réveillon. I tried to finish it really fast, and that's why it only has fringes on one side. In terms of what's next for me, I have an upcoming residency at the Center for Art Tapes in Halifax. I've also been playing with augmented reality and learning new software to better expand my practice. I plan to continue to build on some of the pieces shown here at Urban, as well as develop new bodies of works. And as a point of reciprocity, I'm also working on an online family archive with all the video and audio that I've collected over the years for my family to enjoy privately, because it would really be a shame for all of it to sit on the cutting room floor. I named the show Hand-Me-Downs to reflect the passage of stories and objects through generations, both good and bad. It's a bundle that I want to take my time with and that I will add to before passing it along. And so the work continues. I wanted to say Nyawe again for joining me for my artist talk here at Urban Shaman. And if you couldn't tell, I'm a talker. So I'm happy to take audience questions and call Justin Bear over. Thank you.
So, 3D modeling. It's amazing. I love doing 3D modeling too. And, you know, I did a little bit of teaching of Blender at Art City.
Nice.
And so a question I wanted to ask you is like, what's your advice for like new emerging artists and youth who like want to get into 3D modeling? How do they go about that? Okay,
so there are so many different pathways into digital media and new media art. If you're interested in 3D, there's also a bevy of open source software. Like Blender is completely free. And on top of it, your greatest resource is YouTube and the right questions. So, you know, you can start off with like a basic course on like how to make a donut. And then once you start making a donut or moving from a donut to making your own things, you're going to run into all of these, you know, problems, difficulties. Like, how do I make something fall from the sky? Like, how do I add a photo texture to something? And when you have those questions, you can basically work with them into the internet. Like, I'm largely self-taught when it comes to digital, and so that's what I did. I'd choose a project, choose something that I'd want to create. I'd be like, oh, I want to make I want to make a stereoscopic GIF. I want something that like moves. How do I do that? And so it was about seeking, using those questions, and then experimenting and finding and solving problems on the go. So I'm really, really fortunate in that my band covers my schooling, and even though they didn't want to pay for me to go to college, I wrote a series of very persuasive letters because they said that going to college was going backwards, and you were only allowed to go forwards in terms of your education. Like, you get a diploma and then a bachelor's and then a master's and then a PhD. And so they were like, you already got your bachelor's. Why would you want to go and get a diploma? And I was like, because this is what I need. Like, if I'm going to, like, 3D, it can be really intimidating. And for me, I thought I would benefit a lot from being able to learn it in a formal environment. It took me like it took me like 9 months for like understanding of 3D to click, like to start actually thinking in 3D, moving from a 2D environment. So that was the right call. And then on top of it, something that I didn't mention in the previous question but rolls in nicely is when you're surrounded by other artists who are working in similar media to you, you can ask them questions anytime and you can figure things out together. And there are quite a few online resources that are more community-based. Like there's a Discord server for like Indigenous game makers and game designers, and I find that to be really, really helpful.
Amazing, yeah. Like there's a pretty good community of like Indigenous 3D developers and game designers right now. And
We are small but mighty.
yeah, exactly. And I'm sure everyone knows each other. Hey.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thinking about, I love that you talked about like the hand-me-downs as like a part of a bundle, and so I'd like to hear more about like your experience like reconnecting and what that meant, you know, for you and for your family, and like how you know, you getting into the work of revitalizing, how that's you know, affected your family, or like you know, influenced them. And yeah, I'd like to hear about
like
that.
I mean, I'm certainly not alone in my family in terms of being disconnected. Like I actually have a couple of aunts who would tell people that they were Italian or Mexican because they would be treated better than if they said that they were native, which is sad. And so, you know, some of those aunts have children, and then that means that my cousins are also growing up in similar situations to myself. And while I had the opportunity to reconnect through especially arts and Indigenous spaces on campuses. Like I was in post-secondary for like 11 years, so in 3 different institutions. So that's like a lot of different Indigenous centers for students that I was able to like get into and feel more comfortable in. My cousins didn't necessarily have those same resources. And so I'm like, I'm out here, like I'm doing this, I'm reconnecting. I want to bring them into it. So, you know, once I learned like the protocols that are involved with like smudging, then that meant that I bought 12 different little smudge kits, and then when we all got together for family barbecue in the summer, I like gave them out and we all sat around a table, and then I shared with them everything that I knew related to it, and like we all practiced together. And so when I every now and again I'll like get a call from one of my cousins being like, how do I smudge again, like how does it work? And I'm like, okay, I got you, like put me on speaker, get the feathers, like we can do this together. And media, I think, has a really powerful impact. So I'm sitting down with my cousins to show them like a short film or an animation that's made by an Indigenous artist. I'm getting streetwear and stickers and patches and just like here, and it, being able to have that like visibility and that tactile evidence that culture is like alive and well outside of our family is really encouraging. And I'm just trying to like bring them with me. And you know, my aunts are like a little more not, I guess, like not set in their ways, but like they've lived their whole lives till now without it. So if they ever have a question about it, I'm answering it. I'm telling to the best of my ability, and I'm living my life in like a vibrant Indigenous way, and I just want them to come with me.
It's beautiful. Yeah, it's so nice. And you know, we're all related, right? And like in that experience of you know, residential school and assimilation, right? There's so many people who are also like, you know, in that position where there's like so much cultural loss, and a lot of people reconnecting for the first time and bringing their families along. And I know in your statement for the show, you talked about the show is communicating to people who've been displaced and been disconnected. So is there something that you would like to kind of share for you know, those people who are reconnecting right now, like any insights into that you've learned yourself?
Oh, absolutely. So like anytime I think of like other disconnected people, I think of the times that I've like walked into an Indigenous center on campus somewhere, and I see all these people who like look like me. Like they're not necessarily visibly native, but like they're there, they're curious, they're like a little shy, a little withdrawn. They don't know if it's okay to participate fully in that space and in that practice, but they are so curious. And so I guess my advice is to embrace that curiosity and to allow yourself to belong. So when that voice pops up in the back of your head telling you like, you're not enough, or you're never gonna fit in, or somebody's gonna try to call you out or like do something weird about it, they're not. Like I do have the benefit of coming from a really, really ridiculously large family, so I'm kind of used to like thinking of everyone as my cousin or my aunt or my uncle. But I would just like to, to encourage everyone who has ever felt like me to take a chance, be a little brave, call someone cousin, see where it takes you.
I love it. Are there any questions from the audience?
Yeah, we have 2 questions on YouTube. First one is from Liz Orchard.
Oh my gosh, Liz.
You've talked about how your art was inspired by both dementia and native reclamation. Do you envision your work growing into a larger act of reclamation and healing?
Damn, Liz, you got me. I think because my work stems from such a personal place, like I've never really been preoccupied with like getting big or getting famous, and I don't think I ever will be. But at the same time, work accumulates, right? I don't ever see myself as like artists don't retire. Right? We don't. Like, even if we lose our ability to work with our hands, then it tends to move into something else. It moves into more like conversational points or mentorship. So I just see my work continuing to grow at like a steady rate. It's not like I'm ever going to run out of family photos, and I'm not going to stop taking them either. So I think I don't plan on being a mother. But I still plan on having something to pass on. And if it's anything from my body of work that someone else wants to take and run with it, that makes me happy. That's the only thing I need. I don't need a legacy. I just need something that will be helpful for somebody else in the future.
Great. And then the second question in the chat is from Asha Viraswamy. In this process of storytelling through new media, have you noticed any reoccurring themes or concepts in your own family history that are also reflected in Haudenosaunee oral tradition?
I think the big thing is the way that we gather. The way that we gather and the way that we speak with each other, where we put aside everything else that's happening in our every day-to-day lives, and it's about acknowledging who's there and spending time with them and listening to them. It's about storytelling. It's about sharing knowledge, even though those aren't the words that my family members would necessarily use to describe those gatherings. It's absolutely what is happening there. So yeah, it's keeping our knowledge and our stories alive in the most tender and intimate ways you can imagine. And I think that is a very Haudenosaunee thing to do.
Yeah, I'm wondering, because what you do is so personal and vulnerable and honest. And I guess my question is, do you feel that there's like lines or protocols of how you're engaging with what you're sharing, or if there's, I think mainly protocols around like, are there requests that family make that they want to tell you something but won't go into the work, or how do you draw that line, I guess, essentially?
Of course. I have 3 things, I guess, to say to that. Is when it comes to like interviews, or like if I find a picture and I take a picture of that and like my relative is like, don't, I'm like, no problem, I didn't see it. I'm gonna put it right here, but it's not going out into the world. And then when it comes to some of the footage that I'm using, let's say from like old family tapes, like the ones Auntie's in the back corner, is like, I want to show my subjects, for lack of a better, I want to show my family as complex human beings, but not necessarily like, drag out all of their trauma and put that on screen. Like, I think that's really unfair. And I want to honor them and their stories. And so there is a sort of, like a felt personal line. Like if I see someone on screen and they clearly like look like they're having a really hard time, I'm just like, that doesn't need to be in this piece. That's a private moment that happened to be captured on camera, and I'm going to respect that. And then lastly, when it comes to like Indigenous protocol, one of the, like I know that Indigenous tradition and the digital realm can get a little interesting. Like I've been told by one elder, like, don't smudge on camera. Like if you're live streaming with someone else, don't smudge on camera. But then I speak to someone else that says, oh, we do that all the time. Like when we're gathering remotely and we don't turn our cameras off at all. So there's finding that line. And then there's also a beautiful book called Dreamfast by Elizabeth Dockstader, which explains where the smoke rises, which is that traditionally Haudenosaunee stories were only told in the winter, because if they were, stories are really juicy and enticing, and if you tell too many stories during the summer, it makes the corn spirits wander away from the field to listen to you talk, and then the corn you won't have a very good harvest. And so you reserve the stories for keeping you warm on a cold winter night where the smoke rises in the longhouse or the lodge. And so Elizabeth Dockstader said that for those who are disconnected or displaced, if you're going to engage in stories, pour yourself a cup of tea, get a warm blanket, and create where the smoke rises in your own lodge. And I think that that's really beautiful. So I adhere to that.
I guess I'm thinking a little bit about the ways that these objects, these vintage objects, some of the handcrafted ones, like the Afghans, like I feel like my grandma made sort of similar ones with similar patterns and the red heart yarn. And then I think in the living room installation, there's so many objects that are kind of like, they feel familiar, even if, that's not my space. And I'm wondering about the ways that, I think prior to moving to kind of digital realms, we were all kind of participating in like a shared mass culture, and like everybody had those like Tupperware containers. And I guess I'm wondering, like, as we've moved towards like kind of living in a more highly curated kind of siloed version of culture, like what might be lost in terms of like objects' abilities to serve as like containers for collective memory or kind of a shared experience.
Mm-hmm. I completely feel you on that one. I know it won't ever go away entirely, because there are people that collect vintage things specifically because they are vintage. I'd actually like to talk about this one thing that I saw. I struggled with my own like massive collections because, I got ADHD, so I'm really messy and my place is filled with stuff. Sorry, live-in partner Justin, my sense of decor is very much like maximalism and collecting. And because I was struggling with the mess that makes, I was looking at all of these online sites for like minimalism and like living a more like, minimal life. And this blogger was talking about how his mother died, and she had all this like really, really beautiful furniture and clothing, and while he's trying to live this minimalism life, like he didn't know what to do with all of this stuff. And what he found useful was taking pictures of every single item before then making decisions about where those items could go responsibly. So like donating the furniture, donating the clothing to people who needed it, and then keeping one or two very specific pieces that had the most sentimental value to him. And so I think there is a bit of a follow through with my own practice in terms like when I make VR and when I make 3D translations, I can keep it forever. Like I'm making it for me, I'm borrowing it for a second, but then I'm making my own version of it that lives. And so while mass produced material culture comes in and out, it doesn't have to go away forever. And you can sort of make your own archive in a way of just photos that you take and photos that you share. And when you bring those images up with other people in conversation, you can evoke and elicit everything that is attached to those objects and create really, really deep and important discussion. I hope that helps.
Beautiful, thank you.
Okay, so right now we're at 2:02, so I feel like I have one more question. I'm thinking about like the Sister 7922 works and the trading post kind of connection, and what spawned that? Like what's your connection to like the trading post kind of works, and how did those kind of like find you?
I mean, I guess one thing that I didn't discuss about my childhood was that a lot of the time trading posts were like the most native spaces I was in. So like if we were driving up to Chapleau, which is like a 10-hour drive, it's insane. You know, you got to take a break and you'd hit a trading post along the way, and you'd be surrounded by all of these, like, you know, whether they're being sold or not, cultural artifacts. And it was like this alluring world to me. And like one of the bags, the one that is called Untitled Dismount, which has like a terrible orange warrior on a horse, my mom got for me when I was a kid from one of those trading posts. And at the time I was like, oh, I hate this. Like, I don't know, he's orange or whatever. And then years later I came to like sort of understand and respect it a little more. Even if the choice of orange beads for the guys maybe a little bit problematic, perpetuating stereotypes, etc. And so I had been looking at that bag, and I had been looking for like old beadwork, because I wanted to see like what's like Mohawk style of beadwork. What is this? Like, I want to try doing it. I want to like lean into it. And I kept seeing these like antique pieces that were for sale on eBay. And I was just like, what the hell, man? Like, you're just like selling these pieces of culture for your profit, essentially. And I also thought to myself that those pieces were the kinds of things that I would have loved to inherit if beadwork had continued down my family line. And so there was a little bit, like when I received some funding through Canada Council, I decided to do a little bit of inner child healing, and bought up a bunch of them. I bought them, and I didn't want to just keep them. I wanted to learn from them, and I wanted to talk to them. And so I did.
That's awesome. Like, I know with like my grandmother's and like great grandmother's beadwork and stuff, like you could kind of feel what was going on too at that time as they're making it. And I'm kind of curious, like when you're handling those pieces, like, and you're thinking about, you know, the women who made those, like, has there been any sort of feeling of them? Like, are you connecting
Absolutely.
with them?
Yeah. Some of them you can tell, like, okay, this one's a little rushed. Some of them you can tell they just like, they didn't want to actually have to sell it because it was so intricately done. And then you can almost always find a spirit bead snuck in there somewhere. Which, I mean, I almost don't use spirit beads because I'm sure I have plenty of other mistakes that could be construed as a spirit bead. But yeah, when you're looking for that level of detail so that you can recreate it perfectly, it's like sitting down with someone and using the evidence of what they've made to not just reverse engineer, but to feel it, to channel the person behind the original.
Could you share a little bit about your like 3D modeled granny squares?
Absolutely,
and the
okay.
process for that?
So
yeah, I've got some questions about it. People are like, how did she do that?
So in the gallery, there are these two gigantic vinyl pieces that emulate a shell crochet stitch and a granny square. And I had been, I had already made a couple of blankets in 3D, but they were like cheating, because if you have too many polygons, it slows down the computer. So you have to cheat. You have to make like a flat surface and then apply a texture onto it that looks like a blanket. You're not going to have actual 3D models of all of the strands of yarn that go into a blanket. And while I was researching, I found out that crochet, aka like lace making, doily making, is the only textile form that can't be replicated by a machine. So, you can have machines that do weaving and knitting and so on and so forth. We're all wearing stuff that is a direct result of machine textile work, but crochet can't be replicated in that way. So I thought it was a little fun and cheeky of me to use a machine to create crochet in an unexpected way. And on top of it, the way that I made it was so that it could be kind of like replicated and tiled and patterned endlessly. And, in another lifetime, I could probably cover an entire gallery with this and make everyone go blind.
before we end, do you have any last remarks that you would like to share?
You dare turn this upon me.
I mean, I'm going to do my last remarks too. So, but
I wanted to say, Nyawe Goa. Actually, Manigar told me, you know, if you're going to say Nyawe or thank you, you only say Nyawe Goa, which is like thank you very much when you like really mean it, like when somebody does something incredible for you. And so I am intentionally extending a really big Nyawe Goa to everyone here and to everyone involved in this, because this is a really important milestone, not just for me, but for my family. And so yeah, I'm gonna stop before I get emotional. So Nyawe Goa, Seruguego, like yeah.
thank you so much. Yeah, like in Cree, we have Kineniskodamin, which means a very similar thing, which means like we're grateful. And you say that at times where it's like, you know, thank you so much, you know, and we really appreciated having you at Urban, and like you're so great to work with. And for me, this like means a lot too, because, you know, I'm new in my role here, and to be able to work with an artist who has such a great vision and like was able to produce such an amazing exhibition feels so good to be a part of that. And it was so nice to meet your family and like have everyone here. And you know, this is the type of stuff that we want to do at Urban, right? And the transformative message, right, in your work. And it has a really big impact, and the show was received really well last night, and we're excited to you know, for the next duration of the show. I'm excited to see how it impacts the groups that are going to come here, right? And we're going to have a lot of youth and community organizations come, and I'm really excited for them to see this, because, you know, it's affirming, right? And it's affirming in who they are. And, you know, if there are people who feel a bit lost, right, this show can speak to them. And so we're so grateful to be able to host it. So thank you.
Thank you.